Today I have the chance to showcase Nefer before her release. And in this video we will cover all the usual stuff, but more than anything I want to explain why I'm constantly dashing while playing her. It turns out that Nefer has a couple of techs I'm quite excited about. I also found a way to make her extremely easy and smooth to play, which I'm sure many of you will appreciate. But also a couple of details that, if used well, can allow you to dish out damage much faster than usual and incorporate the burst in different ways. This can all easily make her stronger than she already is. Moreover, I will cover her kit, showcase some of her teams, go through my calculations for her best weapons and build options, and finally, I want to have a brief section about her team compositions. How big of a downgrade is not having one particular support, and what this might mean for the overall releases from Notcry. As always, keep in mind that this is an early access video and the content might be subject to change. It doesn't usually happen, but if I notice any differences in the live version, I'll pin an update in the comments. Before looking at some more advanced gameplay, let's start with the basics. She can be a bit complicated to understand, but let's make it simple. Nefer is a Danger Catalyst user with a crit damage ascension stat and a baseline, even a level 1 of 200 elemental mastery. She fills the role of main damage dealer for the team by changing the Bloom reaction into Lunar Bloom, dealing the majority of her damage as direct Lunar Bloom hits. This means she unlocks and uses the Verdant Dew mechanic. Remember that this new reaction doesn't add anything extra aside from a cooler text and a counter to accumulate these stacks. And Nefer, as we will see, very much needs them. The way she deals damage, however, is a bit complicated. First off, when another Notcry character is in the party and she uses her skill, any danger core on the ground is converted into seeds of the seed. If more are created, they also get converted. These seeds never explode for bloom damage and can't be used for hyper bloom or burgeon reactions. This effect lasts 15 seconds, but in practice it's basically permanent. Meaning goodbye to hyper bloom, burgeon or normal bloom damage with Nefer. But of course we are greatly rewarded for the damage that we lose. Once you cast her skill, she unlocks a special charge attack. This attack deals damage based on her attack and elemental mastery, but most importantly it summons 2 shades that deal 3 instances of Lunar Bloom damage, based entirely on Nefer's elemental mastery. This is direct reaction damage, and it's basically where all her DPS comes from. That's because this hits double dip into elemental mastery, this skill directly with it, and use the elemental mastery multiplier, shown here. Additionally, the reaction ignores defense, but it does consider enemy resistance and it can crit, using Nefer's personal crit stats. Each skill cast gives Nefer access to 3 special short attacks at 0 stamina cost, granted that you have enough Verdant Dews, as each will consume 1. Since you can cast her skill twice, her most basic rotation goes skill, 3 charge attacks, skill, 3 charge attacks, all while constantly generating Verdant Dews. I will share a couple of tips about them in a bit, but for now I want you to know that if you simply hold the attack button, you will get all the charge attacks back to back. Her gameplay can result somewhat similar to Novilette in that sense. And these attacks go through quite a few layers of mechanics and buffs, and this is where it gets a bit complicated, but hopefully I can make it much simpler. While the charge attacks consume Verdant Dews, they also consume up to 3 seeds of the seed, the new blooms that she has access to. Those seeds are then transformed into Veil of Falsehood stacks. You can actually see how many you have above your HP bar. Each of these stacks grants a 9-second 8% buff to her special charge attack, up to a total of 24%, which acts as a brand new multiplier, so it's really strong. On top of that, at 3 stacks, she gets 100 elemental mastery for 8 seconds. In practice, she'll almost always reach both the 24% multiplier and the 100 elemental mastery, since the buffs last quite a while and the seeds are constantly being consumed, refreshing their duration. That is of course as long as you have a field hydro, which you kind of need regardless, to keep the buffs and Verdant Dews going. Now, the buffs aren't over yet. The passive that converts Bloom into Lunar Bloom also increases its base damage, another very strong multiplier for up to 14%. She also gets interruption resistance upon skill cast, and based on her elemental mastery, she makes Verdant Dews regenerate faster during her normal charger attack. This is basically a safety net when running low on stacks. You can simply stay in the charge attack, and as long as you have 1 Verdant Dew when you release it, you will get a special version instead. This passive only works for 9 seconds after a skill cast, unless you already used 3 charge attacks. And lastly, she also happens to have a burst. Compared to the rest of her kit and damage profile, this one is a bit underwhelming. It's AoE danger damage, not considered Lunar Bloom, but it does have high scaling to compensate. It also consumes Veil of Falsehood stacks, basically removing her charge attack multiplier and elemental mastery buff. This means the burst shouldn't be used before at least one charge attack, so that you actually have stacks to consume, and ideally it's used at the end of a rotation, once the resources are spent. With enough verdant use and seeds, you could still use it somewhere in the rotation, but we will come back to this later. Now let's do one quick but mandatory recap. Nefer's full kit activates only when another Nodcry character is in the team. That's when she stops normal bloom reactions to boost her personal damage through verdant use and lunar blooms. Her standard rotation is skill, 3 charge attacks, skill, 3 charge attacks, burst at the end. For all this to work, she needs an off-field Hydro unit to constantly generate seeds and verdant use. Knowing this is already enough to play her close to her best. Now let's talk about the tags I mentioned at the start of the video. First off, as I said earlier, you can simply hold the attack button to get all the charge attacks back to back without much effort, and you should continue to do so even if you run out of verdant use, since she will then use a normal charge attack that activates the faster region of the stacks, and while doing so, you can even dodge without interrupting the state. But here's something more interesting. Nefer herself hits earlier in the animation, while the Shade follow-up attacks happen slightly after. And they happen even if Nefer herself doesn't complete her attack, meaning that we can completely cut this animation, get all the Lunar Bloom damage, and since she's quite literally spamming charge attacks, doing it as often as 6 times. We're basically getting our damage faster by dashing at the right time. And since Nefer is such a greedy hyper carry that will even stop your teammates from getting a lot of reaction damage, any time that we can save while playing her is a big deal. And it's more than just getting damage faster. This can shift what characters you decide to play with, as it can impact how long it takes for you to rotate the entire team, and even what builds and buffs you decide to use. For example, the elemental mastery provided by the instructor set can never cover her entire uptime, but with this stack, it's definitely able to buff an extra charge attack, and that's a nice damage gain. I have to admit that you can be so fast that you lose on one of her charge attack multipliers, but remember that this is not Lunar Bloom damage, so it doesn't matter as much. And you can also be so fast that you don't have enough verdant use at one point. But here we can either get helped by the extra verdant use generation or split our rotation to refresh part of our buffs. Once again, Instructor for example. Lastly, we can also include our burst into this mix and use it as another tool to cancel our charge attack animation. And with enough Hydro, we can even use it in the middle of 2 skills without losing any falsehood stacks. Thanks to the time gained by these dash cancels, we can fit 6 charge attacks and a burst cast in pretty much the same time as 6 charge attacks without the burst cast, when just holding our attack button. I'm honestly very excited to see what other combos or techs might come out once the entire community gets to try her as well. But for now, these things personally make her really fun to play and stronger, but not to the point that they are mandatory. If you just want to hold your attack button, you're still going to be fine. She's honestly very strong regardless. Now for talent priority and some extra detail, the attack talent has the normal version of a charge attack, but in combat we will use this one to activate the faster verdant use regen and get the special one anyway. It can be used out of combat for movement, but honestly it's about as fast as normal sprinting. Since everything here is attack scaling with no reaction damage, you can leave the entire talent at level 1. At best it can apply some extra danger with the normals. The skill, however, is the number 1 priority for damage. That's where the 3 Lunar Bloom hits are, and it should be as high as possible if not crowned, followed by her burst. Let's finally move to her builds. For artifacts, you pretty much have one option, the new set, which is obviously her best in slot and the one you should be farming. Do not even for a moment think about Shimenawa, Bolide or anything that is giving you damage percentage in any form. Those won't increase the damage of your Lunar Blooms. Maruchasi is the only option we could think about, but it requires Furina plus a healer. And that's another team comp where the damage percentage from Furina burst is pretty much useless and leads to some very awkward team comp or extended rotations. In the leftover set, we can of course look into 2-piece plus 2-piece combinations, focusing on Elemental Mastery, or even Gilded and Flower of Paradise Lost. And your main stats are going to be EM Sands, EM Goblet, Crit Circlet. You are very unlikely to use anything different from this. Even considering a burst every rotation and the talent's that scale of attack, that is not a stat you're looking for. It's very apparent when looking at your substat priority. Just look how minuscule of a damage increase we get on an already built Nefer when adding more of any stat. 10 rolls of attack percentage do not even compare to 1 of Elemental Mastery. Let that sink in. Do not use attack nor try to buff it in any way for this character. Also, since we're talking about building, I want to point out that Nefer technically doesn't care about levels. Lunar Bloom damage doesn't consider it at all, and since any other reaction is out of question in her teams, definitely get to her last ascension, but don't worry too much about all the way to 90. For energy, I'm a big believer in her burst, but not to the point that you should sacrifice your damaging stats for it. And for weapons, here I'm assuming a full rotation with Lauma and Aino in the team, plus a flex slot that I expect most to use for a sustain unit. Right away we can see that 5-star weapons are not as good as one would expect, and that's because they rarely offer any synergy with Nefer's kit. We have damage percentage, high base attack, HP buffs and so on, meaning that you will likely choose your free-to-play craftable weapon or general Elemental Mastery statistics. Or maybe even Wizit. This one is a bit hard to evaluate. First off, we only care about the Elemental Mastery buff, then it's up every 2 rotations, and depending on the execution, it might not even buff all the damage you're doing. It can be an okay option, but I'd consider it more for people not willing to craft the Black Marrow Lantern. Sacrificial Fragments is another weapon that provides Elemental Mastery, but has an interesting passive that might give you 3 skills per rotation. But the problem is that even at high refinements, it's not guaranteed, plus you still need enough verdant use. Especially with dash cancels, you're definitely not doing 9 charge attacks in a row, but it might spawn interesting rotation ideas. And finally, her signature weapon is really good. Like, really good. And that's because everything you see on this chart is pretty much not just a personal increase to Nefer's damage, but an increase to the entire team's damage. Between locking Bloom reactions and not really having that many team options, she will simply do all of her team's damage. But anyway, this weapon offers 124.2% crit damage in total, 8 crit rate and 120 Elemental Mastery. And since you might consider her first constellation instead of getting her weapon, that's a 60 extra Elemental Mastery multiplier added to your Lunar Bloom. Compared to Black Marrow, C1 is basically the same value as her weapon. And at this point, let me add C2 as well, which simply makes her multiplier given by Veil of Falsehood stronger and provides more Elemental Mastery. Not financial advice. Time to yap about teams. And firstly, about the strongest support available to Nefer. The buffs and synergy provided by this character are, first off, oddly precise. I'll show you why in a second. But obviously, also the highest damage increase at C0 out of any other option. Let's list what Lauma is doing for Nefer. We have a Lunar Bloom base damage increase of 14%, we have a Scented Gleam that activates every Notcry set and the Notcry Resonance, we also have the Danger Resonance for a bit more Elemental Mastery, 10 crit rate and 20 crit damage directly to Lunar Bloom, Resistance Shred for Dendro up to 25%, and a flat damage increase to Lunar Bloom that will consider Nefer's crit and the resistance of the enemy, making it even stronger. And what do we lose for all of this? The ability to hold Lauma's skill and get her damage, right? Honestly, I don't see that as a big loss, since, well, it's happening just once per rotation, and not using it allows Lauma to fully focus on Elemental Mastery and Energy Recharge, without a care for her crit value. Plus, her top skill won't consume any of the flat damage increase provided by her burst. And just to show how precise and synergistic this duo is, let's cover this burst a bit more. This can technically buff up to 36 hits of Lunar Bloom damage, but if we are not able to hold her skill, then she will buff 18 hits instead. And would you look at that? Nefer has 2 skills, multiplied by 3 short attacks, multiplied by 3 hits. Exactly 18 Lunar Blooms every rotation, which are all being buffed by Lauma. These two are clearly made for each other. But when looking at the rest of the team, we cannot find anything remotely close to this amount of synergy. We have one slot which is obviously a Hydro fielder, but it hardly finds relevant buffs, as anything that offers damage percentage is pretty useless, and we don't even have a good time triggering bursts like Xingqiu and Yelan. So we're pretty much going to default to Aino or anyone that can simply give us off-field Hydro and at the same time doesn't have too long of cooldowns, because that's another problem. Using a character that needs 20 or more seconds to recast their important talents will simply slow down Nefer. And that happens on the last slot too, which can mostly be just about anything. No matter who we choose, the performance of the team is not going to be impacted that much. Many danger characters can further buff our elemental mastery, Zhongli can provide some more resistance shred, although we really have a ton of it. Certain characters can simply be useful for their ability to hold a particular set, but I think most should simply cover sustain in the slot. Nefer is a melee character that is not particularly tanky and doesn't want to spend time dodging outside of cancelling her animations. And while she does have some resistance to interruption, that doesn't make her immortal. Nahida, Prototype Ember, Cookie, Zhongli, Kirara, or really anything that doesn't disrupt the team and makes sense for either sustain or buffs will be welcome. Remember that we ruled out any buff that is not elemental mastery or reaction damage. Inefa is another character that can be okay, as she also has some elemental mastery buff, but the uptime of Lunar Charged is often unlikely to be great. The spreads given to Nefer are however not too bad. And lastly, just like the Hydro slot, certain characters will inevitably slow down your rotation, and that's not often worth it. Best example is someone like C6 Diona. 200 EM is pretty nice, especially with a shield and some healing, but her 20-second cooldown is not great. For general gameplay, however, do not feel scared to play her at all. Caring about rotation length is something you should do only with really hard content where you need to min-max every aspect. Generally, and honestly, even in Abyss, many of the less ideal units are absolutely fine. Again, the Hydro slot and the 4th slot of a Nefer team are not as impactful. And also remember that you will want the following sets in your team: Deep Food, Serenity, and ideally Instructor. The supports of a Nefer team can also look into weapons as a way to buffer further. Most Sumeru craftable weapons are a bit annoying to trigger but offer a decent buff. Key, if it can be stacked, Freedom, and similar weapons. Again, all we can do to help Nefer is pretty much elemental mastery. For teams without Lauma instead, we are unfortunately losing many buffs, and it's now basically a must to include Aino or Inefa to get the Ascended Gleam passive and the Seeds of the Seat. Without them, we're losing a big multiplier on Lunar Bloom damage, her best set, 100 EM, and even a lot of damage on our burst. It's unfortunate to say that Lauma is a big deal. Not even a C2 Nahida is comparable to what a C0 Lauma is giving us, but the teams you will end up making are still going to be fine provided a strong Nefer. Honestly, with Lauma she's among the best DPS in the game, but even without, she's not looking too bad or unusable. That's pretty obvious. Closing out with how our teams turned out to be, I think it's even more clear now we are due a Hydro character, ideally a healer too. And that low-key scares me a little bit. Nefer looks already very strong and she pretty much just has one good support. Now imagine a really powerful and synergistic Hydro unit as a buffer or off-field damage dealer, and that would still be 3/4 for a perfect team. But who knows about future impact anyway, we will see eventually. I'm overall very excited for the release of Nefer. Once she is out, I will be live streaming more testing, especially to push her combos. You can catch that on Twitch or here on YouTube. Like and sub if you enjoyed this video, and see you next time!